Well, thank you very much. And yeah, I'm Joe Milbrath. I work for the National Park Service. Marty, that was a really awesome presentation and big shoes to follow. And your NSD skills are definitely solid. So I wouldn't be bashful about that. So I work for the Park Service, but I'm going to be presenting about a different project that I've been working on for the last year, developing maps and brochures for some community conservancies in northern Kenya. And this project started out as a partnership with the Department of Interior's International Technical Assistance Program and this group in northern Kenya, the Northern Rangelands Trust. So I'll just briefly give a quick overview of what NRT is and what their mission is and some of the main impacts that they're facing and some really cool initiatives that they've started up and kind of folded into the project that I kind of got involved with their organization. And I'll briefly go into the scope, the maps themselves, and kind of some overall design ideas and decisions that were made. And then go through a map template that will also be provided to Northern Rangelands Trust, and then kind of some future training that is rapidly approaching here. So NRT is an umbrella organization that oversees 39 member conservancies throughout northern and coastal Kenya. Within those conservancies are 18 different ethnic groups. And their aim is to develop resiliency within this area. It's an area that has seen a lot of strife over the years, and they come at it with kind of a multi-pronged approach, both cultural and natural. And so they are trying to build like a sustainable business model that's linked to conservation. And a main element of the landscape is trying to secure peace in this area. There's the landscape has a history of conflict between these ethnic groups, and they're doing this through actually developing local governance that manages the landscape. And this is being done with, giving these ethnic groups, some that really don't like each other, that live right next to each other, the power to manage their own land. And then, which in turn, and through managing it to help conservation, will then protect some of Kenya's iconic wildlife species and allow kind of a healthy symbiosis to live on the landscape and both provide and anyways. And so there are a number of complex challenges that are impacting the livelihood of the people and the wildlife in northern Kenya. Insecurity has plagued this area through this ethnic conflict, and livestock raiding and just overall political incitements over the years. Social exclusion is kind of refers to the general lack of knowledge, voice, and understanding of how to use your power to affect change. A lot of these areas are very remote and have been relatively cut off from a lot of information. Depletion of natural resources is just kind of goes along with the degradation of the landscape through a number of different reasons: wildlife poaching, competition over water uses and grazing areas. And the area has been seeing a lot of population growth, which then coincides with the more people, the more livestock that's on the land, the more degradation that also ensues. And finally, much like the Anwar, climate change is affecting this area dramatically, and with increased frequencies of drought and extreme weather events that really impact the land. And so, NRT has established some really cool initiatives, one of which that I just find amazing is this Beadworks program, which is establishing this women's cooperative. And so it's empowering the local women to use traditional craft skills that turns this product into a viable business model. And they're distributing and selling these beautiful beads, not only locally but internationally, and it's creating income that that helps sustain the local population, but then they also use some of that income to put towards conservation as well. Innovative rangeland techniques. This is a really, really cool idea that I learned while I was there. Was the rangeland managers there are using these techniques where in this photo, which is pretty washed out, but there's an invasive Acacia raphicians plant that has just completely overtaken the landscape, and it's really thorny, and it's really hard to just navigate through. It just overtakes all of the native vegetation. And so what they're doing is removing this by hand and taking the plants to create these, they're called bomas, but they're basically a natural fence line, which then they bring in their cattle and bring them into a really dense area. And while their cattle is in this area, they feed them local grasses that that the cattle then digest. And with their hooves, they break down this really, really coarse soil that then crushes, their excrement into the soil and then reseeds the soil naturally. And so you end up getting this little patchwork of natural grasses that are coming back in these little circles, and they just move from one boma to the next and just keep moving around. It's a really innovative, cool technique, and it's restoring the land back to its traditional grass ecosystem, which then these major megafauna just thrive on: the elephants, the rhinos, the lions, all the things that kind of make this place very special and open to tourist eyes. People go there to go on safari, and so these local communities were looking for ways to bring in ecotourism, and that's kind of where my role in this project came in. This is an area that has seen tourism before, and two of the conservancies that I ended up working on have some really exclusive, ultra wealthy lodges that are based there. And those eco lodges there is some money from them that's trickling down into NRT's conservancy projects, and so it's not all evil, but it is very isolating. And folks that are going to these lodges are mainly, pretty isolated from the local people. They're going on guided tours that are run by, staff from these lodges, and there really is no interaction, and there isn't any money that's trickling actually down to the local level. So our, this part of this program was to market kind of some low-impact tourism that's mainly marketed towards the middle-class Kenyan population in Nairobi that are looking to get out of the city and go north of Mount Kenya and go test their chops at backpacking and camping and also go on these ranger-led safari tours and tour some of the cultural villages. I will say that in order to participate in any of these events, you have to, the people will also have to pay a fee for a ranger to lead them throughout this thing. So they're also providing resources to local rangers that are both male and female. There's a big training program to empower women to move into these roles as well. And so when you bring in tourists, you got to make a map and provide maps, so hopefully they know where they're going and where not to go. And so part of the framework of this project was to develop 3 maps and brochures of some pretty well-established conservancies that they felt were appropriate to bring tourists into. Now, navigating on these landscapes, this is actually the only sign I saw touring this area. So there is some serious logistical challenges getting around. So when I started the project, I just did a quick search, to see what data I could find, any other maps that are available, and this was essentially the only map that I could find from NRT, and there are very few of just the region in general that were, I guess, free and open source. And so, this was a good starting point, and it showed me that, while the cartographic, display of this is not maybe up to snuff for a lot of people at this conference, it still does show that they're doing a lot of hard work to collect data and ensure that they're building a good database of not only infrastructure data but also migration and wildlife and conflict data. So they're doing really good things. They just needed a little help on the cartographic side. So I was really excited when I found NRT has some really solidly developed graphic guidelines, and I think they have a graphical design team within the organization that produces these reports that I think go out to a lot of funding sources, and so they've definitely set up a lot of parameters which really helped with the design of these things. And the color palette, and I think you can kind of see a lot of similarities in here that might evoke like National Geographic. And I think they have a working relationship with Nat Geo, and actually a few weeks before I was there, Peter McBride was on location photographing for a while. So I think there is a lot of back and forth with them, which then pops up in the design. So they have theirs, but I definitely trickled in some National Park Service stuff too. So being a Park Service employee, I got a little excited and a little fearful of what font choices I was going to use, and then I found this and didn't have to make that decision at all. They have it all set up. So I took all this information and just made a map. And we started with Westgate. It's definitely the most developed and ready site for tourism to kind of hit the ground running. And there's a few design choices here. I mean, I showed this to my wife the other day, and she's like, "It looks like a lot like a park map." And I was like, "Well, I guess you just go with what you know, right?" So there are some design choices, and a lot of stuff that I use on my day-to-day job that that influenced me on this project. But one of which we went back and forth a lot about the actual design of the map and paper size and whatnot. And we ended up going with a unigrid design, basically because printing costs on these the printing process is very efficient. There's very little paper wasted, little trimming, and so you can actually get fairly efficient printing at lower costs. So that was very important, and we found a professional printer in Nairobi that could work with anything. So then, as far as the design and the overall look, I wanted to make sure that these were very clean and easy to read. In my time looking for maps in Kenya, I wasn't able to really find any, and I wanted to make sure that there wasn't any ambiguity with people reading these maps and being confused. And so I wanted to make sure that things were kind of stripped out and at a pretty basic level and easy to understand. I also wanted this, clean approach with, maybe a thicker ribbon and a really subtle inner glow on the inside of the main conservancy, while leaving things outside relatively stripped off the map. We used a semi-universal symbology. Some could argue with this, but ultimately just took a lot of the symbology from the National Park Service, and we wanted to limit it at least to symbols that translate, I think, to like Swahili culture and that part of the world. The restroom symbol might be a little. I think it still works, but their version of a restroom is very different than ours. So, but camping is still the same. And I also just emphasized the mountain peaks instead of just using a dot. Just kind of gave it a simple kind of mountain profile to quickly illustrate that this is a point of elevation. We also used Swahili local names for most of the physical features. There's like Sundowner Rock, that's more of just a place name that they all refer to, and wanted to make sure that was passed along. As far as the relief shading, this was an area that I really had to fight my own urges to go wild with, and ultimately just kind of landed on this really simple monotone relief shading that kind of leaves the point of interest at the conservancy and the map information level, but we also wanted to make sure that it's easy to replicate. And eventually these maps will be, going to the staff at NRT, and then they will take the reins and create the remaining 36. And so we wanted to set up a design that worked, that was relatively easy to redo, and once we kind of set on a style, just ended up first going to Kalama, which borders Westgate, and then to Ilingwesi. Now this has a little faint forest cover, which doesn't show super well in this, but it's there. So once the maps were all at least in draft form, I got to go to Kenya and go drive the roads and make sure the data and everything looked good, and basically get some spinal realignment. It's amazing what they're able to drive on there. And whoops. Here's one more, just bone rattling. But yeah, it was ultimately really, really valuable to see the landscape firsthand and to understand that there's one paved road in the entire region, and all of the travel is on some really, really rough roads. So we wanted to make sure that, this is the actual main thoroughfare coming out of Westgate. So yeah, good stuff. That was after 6 hours of that. So after we did our kind of ground truthing, we all met up and set out to devise how the other side of the brochure, the interpretive side, and what kind of messages we really wanted to come across, and the design choices used for this. Obviously, it looks a lot like a National Park Service brochure, and actually we started with a National Park Service designer that wasn't able to complete the project, but definitely had some influence on the overall look of these things. But ultimately, we wanted to ensure that the design was something that could be updated, and then the content could be manipulated as needed in the future. And so we wanted to just ensure that we have boxes for images, corresponding text, that it's fairly clean and works well and can be updated easily. But they have a amazing resource of photographs that National Geographic has allowed them to use, and so it's quite the treat to be able to pick from imagery like that. So we did a few brochures here. And then one of the main pieces here is I'm providing a pre-styled map template once this is done that has all the layers, all the labels and physical features are kind of pre-styled already, so they can just grab what they need and place it on the map. All the key fill areas and roads and rivers, those are also set to an appearance within the layers tabs. So ultimately, hopefully they can import the data, put it into the layer that they need, and it's pre-styled. Of course, there's a lot of cartographic, noodling that has to happen after that. So it's not a one-size-fits-all, but it'll work for now. And the next steps with this project is ultimately training their GIS staff in a lot of these kind of the foundations of cartography, which is going to be a big challenge, but we will be holding a series of Skypes and phone calls, going through, sharing a bunch of documents of just, how to navigate this thing to start. And then I'm hoping we're still discussing another on-site intensive training for about a week. And then I'll be redoing that comprehensive map that I showed earlier, and then handing off the keys, and they'll be finishing up the 36 other brochures. So thank you very much, and I don't think we have time for questions.